Hello viewers. So today I will discuss about Laravel Request Life Cycle process. As we all know, Laravel is enriched with lots of feature. But thing is how the entire request process has its different phase to return response on browser. If the question has arisen in your mind, then you are at right tutorial to find the solution. In this tutorial, I will discuss the backbone of Laravel named as Request Lifecycle. The life cycle in Laravel itself it's a complicated process. Hundreds of classes and file will be created for every request and then destroyed after it's get done. The request of life cycle has to process through a bunch of terminology like autoloader, kernel, service providers, dispatch request and routes. You have to understand all this terminology to understand the Laravel request lifecycle so that you will work with more confident with Laravel framework and you will be able to extend different functionalities however you like. So let's dive into the request lifecycle step 1. So we can say starting point of any request in Laravel is public index.php. It contains a few line of code in it. This few line of code perform an initialization action. It is a simply a starting point for loading the rest of Laravel framework. So you can see what it's doing. So it's loading vendor autoload.php. You can see the vendor autoload.php in the vendor folder. It is vendor and the autoload.php. So first of all, this is being called. Now if we go back to our public index.php, then we can say it is next calling bootstrap app.php. So what it will do, you can see the bootstrap the framework and it's get ready for use, then will load up the application so that we can run it and send the response back to the browser and delight our users. So let's see how it's look like. This is the bootstrap file. If we go in deep detail in these two files, we can see a large amount of files are required for every request. Each file needs its parsing and compiling. Compiled result will be destroyed after request, and all the created resource can be reused in other requests. Like we can see in a storage framework and cache. We can see lots of caches created. So if we made another request and the same file may call, so it will load from here. In this file all requests are directed to the file by your web server like Apache or Nginx configuration. The index.php file load composer generated autoloader definitions, and the action took place here to create an instance of Laravel application from bootstrap app.php. Once the application instance generated, the incoming request will be handled by the kernel. There are two types of kernel in Laravel. As we can see, one is under console folder app console kernel and one under app http kernel. Both of these two kernels are the central point of each request. Let's understand HTTP kernel, which is placed in app http kernel.php. Like if we open this file, on the top of just after the namespace we can see it is extending eliminate foundation http kernel, which is a base class of this kernel and contain bootstrap method. So let's open this file and see what's inside this kernel class. This file is we can find the file under vendor folder, Laravel framework src foundation http kernel. So we can see this base class of this kernel contains bootstrap method. This method check if our application has been bootstrapped or not. You can say bootstrapping here as the process of starting or resetting. The bootstrap method runs on a bunch of classes to bootstrap the application. It loads the configuration file, also loads the environmental variable, handle exceptions, register the facets, and also register the application service providers. The default service provider are stored in the app providers. If we move to app folder and under provider, we can see the default service provider are listed here. Further, we can see the kernel also defines a lots of middlewares. The request need to pass through before being handled by your application. So what middleware does? Its main task is to manage HTTP session, detecting maintenance mode, verifying CSRF tokens, or you can say it's merely filter your request that are trying to enter in your application. Like for instance, you don't want to give the user access to some pages without being logged in. You can handle that by using middleware in your root file. If we scroll this page, we can see the handle method of the kernel. It's simple. It's take a request and process it and return a response. Once the application has been bootstrapped and all the service provider had been registered, the request will be handed off to the router for dispatching. The router will dispatch the request to a route or controller, as well as run any route specific middleware. Some middleware are assigned to all routes within the application, like those defined in the middleware properties of the HTTP kernel. If we move to our route, so this is the route, and if we open our root file, then we can see here we used a root group middleware. You also can specify a specific root middleware, as it is a group middleware, but you can specify a root specific middleware. I will update you soon with a video tutorial upon middleware. If the request passes through all the match routes assigned middleware, the root or controller method will be executed and the response returned by the root or controller method will be sent back through the root chain of middleware. Once the root or controller method return a response, the response will travel back outward through the root's middleware, giving the application a chance to modify or examine the outgoing response. Finally, once the response travel back through the middleware, the HTTP kernel handle method return a response object and the index.php file calls the send method on the returned response. The send method send a response content to the user web browser. So that's it. We have gone through the life cycle of Laravel, understand associated terminology, and hope it's clear now. The center of attraction here is bootstrapping process. Now let me give you a step-by-step request lifecycle that will help you visualize the step mentioned above. To do this, I will open Once I hit the URL, the browser will send the page request over the internet to the web server. To my web server is Apache. The web server will receive the request and analyze the request information in the web server's configuration file. The site root file, the site's root path is specified based on the web server. Will look for index.php file in the root directory, since URL doesn't contain any subdirectory or any other roots. Web server will direct the request to public index.php. In this step, PHP interpreter is executing the code content in the index.php file from the request. During this step, autoloader file which are generated by the composer will be loaded. Then after, the kernel will receive the request, load the service provider, and will be redirected to the route. Route will render the view file content and return back to the web server. So here from here you can see it is redirecting to home controller. So let's open home controller, and here we need to move to index, and we can see it's simply returning to home view. Web server receive the output from PHP and send it back over the internet to user's web browser. The user web browser receive the response from the server and render the web page, which is loaded now. So in this tutorial video we have discussed upon Laravel Request Life Cycle. I hope you like this video and now you are more confident over the Laravel Request Life Cycle.